So Wizards of the Coast uses its reaction and bites. I'm BECMI Berserker, and welcome to my channel, where I share my opinion on D&D, and possibly, in the future, other role-playing games. You won't always agree with me, but that can be a good thing, as long as we grow a community with polite discourse. If you're passionate about D&D, or tabletop role-playing in general, you'd have to live under a rock not to have noticed the recent announcement of OneD&D, the new non-edition 6th edition. What followed soon after this, apart from the obvious anxieties around microtransactions, was a flurry of concern for what this meant for the OGL, and Wizards of the Coast delivered. In an announcement on the 21st of December, Wizards outlined their plans for OGL 1.1 and the requirements for creator content to adhere to it. I'm not going to go into any detail about what this actually means legally. There are far more qualified content creators out there able to do that more eloquently than me. But my understanding is that any content made for OneD&D will fall under this OGL. With the small number of companies making over $750,000 a year having to pay royalties. This royalty amount is currently unspecified. There's currently no clarity, I think, whether this amount is index-linked or static. That is, will it be adjusted in accordance with inflation? So there seems to be the potential for more creators to fall into this bracket as time goes on. While I don't see this being too much of a big deal, I think paying royalties for making a product on the back of another's property only fair if I'm honest, and Wizards have been more tolerant than most companies out there by having an OGL in the first place. However, this does seem to target those potentially more expensive but lucrative creations, such as video games or even virtual tabletops implementing OneD&D rules. Virtual tabletops. Why might Wizards want to make third-party VTT creation an unattractive prospect? All this might mean very little to most players. What's the big deal, right? If you don't make and sell D&D content, why should you be bothered? Well, it's all about control of the market, which ultimately affects your control of choice. One of the most frequent comments I received in my previous video about WotC's OneD&D announcement, link below, was that no one has to switch editions. You have your books, don't you? And if you have a group, just stick to those books and all will be fine. Whilst I agree in principle, this is about to be tested more strongly than ever before. Let's examine this closer. You have, of course, the power to say no. But ultimately, most people will say yes. The evidence from all previous edition releases backs this up. It's happened with every edition so far. Why is this a problem if you don't want to change? It will impact your potential to find a group that wants to play your preferred version of the game, or even your ability to keep your current group together. As I've mentioned in a previous video, it only takes one in your group to want to try the new edition. Then you're all in, and returning to an earlier edition becomes not so much a choice, but a sales pitch to convince everyone in your group that older was better. This is after purchases in the new edition have been made, and your players are down a number of whatever your currency happens to be. So the evidence shows that fans split after every edition. From WotC's perspective, this is not profitable. So it wants to stop that from happening. Hence, no new edition, just an evolving game. It's a slick angle, and it makes perfect business sense. Let's think about D&D's history as a profit-making concept for a moment. It's always had problems. Why? Because the fact is, we only need the core rules, our imaginations, and some friends. That's it. All the tools for the game are in those books. Break it down, and there is nothing else you need. Except dice. I forgot the dice. Because of this, you'll reach a plateau in the sale of core books and need to convince your customers they need more stuff. In the past, this was pre-written scenarios called modules targeted at DMs, and officially designed player character sheets aimed at, of course, the players. This was in the days before people had printers at their homes. Then there are the campaign settings, maybe some books on extra monsters. This was called bloat then, Imagine if we could have seen the future. Essentially, the potential to extract more cash from players has always been a challenge. In my opinion, this has been the root issue with D&D as a sustainable business. I mean, let's be honest, D&D is essentially monetized let's pretend. You pay for a framework of rules to pretend in, and off you go. Getting consumers to continually pay for this is enormously hard, which is why, I believe, it's so reliant on its community and brand. All of this makes me think about the era of Lorraine Williams at the helm of TSR in the late 80s and 90s. She's a divisive and vilified figure in the history of the game. Not an entirely fair representation in my opinion. Lorraine diversified TSR's reach beyond specific D&D support into books, comics and magazines. Magic the Gathering began under her watch. Much of Lorraine's lack of popularity was due to her not actually being a gamer. But it can't be disputed that she had moderate success before TSR ran into production problems and was sold to Wizards of the Coast. However, the parallels between her vision to turn around the finances of TSR and that of Cynthia Williams, current president of WotC, to better monetize the D&D brand, both point to identification that D&D can be more profitable than it is. This has become more possible through modern technology. Now let's be honest, no gamer should really take issue with a company trying to remain in profit when they are supplying you with products for your hobby. Where the issue affects us differently today compared to 30 odd years ago is how and where the game is now played, combined with how purchasing works. That is, the growing normalization of subscription-based purchasing and electronic payments. There's a great amount of noise going around at the moment in the world of commerce, that in the future you won't own anything and you'll be happy. And I can't help feeling that this is leaking into the design for D&D. I mentioned earlier the potential for OGL 1.1 to impact third-party VTT creators wishing to include the D&D rule set. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that the reason for this is that the VTT is going to become the front and centre play space for future D&D. Shock, I know, but not just for the reasons discussed elsewhere. Let me take you back a bit before I make my potentially controversial prediction. D&D has for many years made its way to computer game format, from Eye of the Beholder to Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights. 3rd edition D&D lent itself much more to turn-based tactical combat, and this brought us Temple of Elemental Evil and a little-known game called Dungeons & Dragons Tactics, which was more failure than success, but a marker in terms of what players demanded, even if the technology wasn't ready. What this tells us is that, when alone and wanting our D&D fix, we'd resort to second best, a computerized DM in a limited and computerized world. That's a hugely exploitative market, so let's park that for a moment. Recently we've had the circular messaging stating that D&D has a DM crisis. There are not enough DMs to run games for all the players out there. Some have cited the overly numerous rules in 5e that can put players off. I can't say what the actual cause is, but what I do know is that there is a supply and demand problem, one that has seen the rise of players willing to pay to play. Something that would be incredible to contemplate years ago, and also the rise of the professional DM. I mean, I'm just trying to picture telling my old careers teacher at school that I wanted to be a professional DM. But break down what a professional DM is, and it's someone making a living off, for the sake of this argument, running D&D. In other words, WotC's product. A business consultant would tell you that's lost revenue. So considering this information, the D&D announcement, and the VTT being front and centre for the delivery of D&D, I'm going to make a prediction, which might be a bit off the wall. And that is that all of this is paving the way for the delivery of D&D in a very new way. A way that means you don't have to meet up with friends. A way that won't suffer from a lack of DMs. A way that will ensure D&D remains under total control of Wizards of the Coast. And that way is through AI, or artificial intelligence. Now don't swipe left just yet. Let me back this statement up. Hasbro is a multi-million-dollar corporation. It does business strategy on a level that is scanning the horizon at least 3 years from now. The fact that its CEO and WotC's president are ex-Microsoft is no accident, and not limited to just microtransaction development. They will have strategic links to all kinds of experimental research currently being conducted, such as the kind contained in this article called AI Trained to be a Dungeon Master and Generate Plots for Dungeons & Dragons, dated 9th of December this year, alluding to work that began back in 2018. Also contained in this article is a link to another from early 2020 called Forget Chess. The real challenge is teaching AI to play D&D. I'll post links below to both these articles, but with this research already in its stride, I wouldn't be surprised if primitive AI becomes part of the one D&D experience and is running adventure products within 5 years. Sure, it'll be rudimentary to start with, but the amount of data through gamer responses and interactions would be analysed and learned from. Granted, it sounds like a million miles away, but I think it's not unrealistic to assume it's closer than we know, and I also think it'll have D&D players running to one D&D in droves. I mean, imagine this kind of thing ported over to the metaverse. All sorts of options and IT partnerships become possible, and the immersive nature of the game, combined with an indefatigable DM, will lock players in. Okay, so now I've predicted the end of the world. What does it all mean for those of us that resist? Well, ultimately, I believe humans have a fundamental need to meet face to face. The growth of one D&D and monopolization of its property will drag more people towards that ecosystem. But there will be the inevitable kickback, the same kind that happened when Osric and Labyrinth Lord came along, as well as Dungeon Crawl Classics and Old School Essentials. People still play board games despite computer games being allegedly superior. The need for human exchange and sharing of experience is fundamental, and I don't think any amount of online 1D&D will take that away. Of course, there will be the option to play 1D&D face to face, although I do wonder how dependent it will be on embracing the online aspect of the system. That said, the big question I have is around what the response will be by the rest of the RPG industry in terms of the medium they market their future games to. This will, of course, be dictated by WotC's success and whether there is a space for competitors to occupy. It may come down to how many subscriptions a player can afford. I almost feel like Frodo when he told Gandalf he wished he didn't live to see such times, but on hearing Gandalf's sage response, I probably want to say something rude to him. Anyway, I hope this has been an interesting train of thought. Let me know what you think. Am I way off? Or has this line of thought been occurring to you also? I'm BECMI Berserker. Please like and subscribe if you wish to support me in making more content, and I hope to see you back here soon.